Hello, welcome to our live stream today about miscarriage. I'm your host, Asnath, Losala. I'm Asnath, and I'm honoured to welcome our guest today, the Director of the Miscarriage Association, Ruth. The goal of this session is to provide clear and accessible information about miscarriage in sign language for deaf people, and also to encourage any of you viewers at home to get involved in the conversation. You can click and join live, you can join by Zoom, or you can type your comments on social media and we'll ask them to Ruth while she's here today. So welcome, Ruth. Thank you so much for coming to share your knowledge and your experience with the viewers. We've also got Rachael in the studio with us who's interpreting today. And we understand miscarriage can be a sensitive and emotional topic, but we really want to create a safe space and promote this topic so that people feel comfortable to ask their questions and get involved in the conversation. So that's what's really important. So let's get started. So, hello Ruth. You work for the Miscarriage Association. What does that charity do? Explain a little bit more.
Yeah, so we are there to provide support and information for anybody who is affected by miscarriage or ectopic pregnancy or molar pregnancy. And when I say affected by, it's not just the person who was pregnant. It might be their partner, it might be their parents, it might be somebody else who's close to them. So we're there for anyone who needs kind of somebody to listen and somebody to help them understand what's happening.
Wow. So just to go back a little bit, you did mention about ectopic pregnancies and molar pregnancies. What's the difference between those two?
Well, if I start with I'm going to talk mostly about miscarriage, but ectopic pregnancy is where the pregnancy is growing in the wrong place. Instead of it being in the main part of the uterus or womb, it's growing either in one of the tubes that's come out from the womb, or it might be in a small corner of the uterus. And in both cases, there's not enough room for it to grow. It can't survive. So that's an ectopic pregnancy, and I can talk a bit more about it later. And a molar pregnancy, which hardly anybody has heard of, is a pregnancy that doesn't start properly right at the very, very beginning, but the pregnancy hormones keep growing and they grow too fast and too high, and the pregnancy, the uterus is preparing itself for a baby that's not there, and that can have a health risk for the mother. So both ectopic pregnancy and molar pregnancy are difficult, distressing. It means the loss of a baby that you thought you were going to have, and they also have health risks. So it's tough.
Okay, so like you were saying, this ectopic pregnancy, it can kind of grow in the wrong place, and it can be a real health risk for the woman. Is there any way to reduce the risk of this happening? Or, what are the dangers? Could the woman die from it?
So there's no obvious ways to prevent an ectopic pregnancy. I mean, generally being healthy probably helps, but you can be very healthy and still have an ectopic pregnancy. And yes, it can be a health risk for the mother if the baby is growing in the tube and the tube bursts, then she will have internal bleeding. And that can, in the worst case, cause her to die. So it's very frightening, and it's really important that she gets treated. She would usually have an operation.
Oh, wow. So the operation, do you mean they kind of operate to take the baby that was growing there then? Would it be possible to have the baby after that operation, or is it just dependent on the situation?
It can sometimes happen that your fertility is lower after the ectopic pregnancy. It also depends if the other tube is okay. But many, many women who have an ectopic pregnancy go on to have a healthy pregnancy and baby.
Wow. And so do miscarriages, do they happen a lot? Are they common? Or not very often? You know, what makes those miscarriages happen? You know, is it because of alcohol consumption? Or if that person's not fit, not healthy? Is it any of these kind of things influence whether you're likely to have a miscarriage or not?
Okay, lots of questions all in one.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Miscarriage is horribly common. About 1 in 4 pregnancies miscarries. So that means that the baby doesn't develop or doesn't develop properly or dies before you get to 24 weeks of pregnancy. Most pregnancies are supposed to last for 40 weeks. If a pregnancy dies, a baby dies after 24 weeks, that's called a stillbirth. It's for the parent, it maybe feels exactly the same, but we're talking about miscarriage. And miscarriage happens for all sorts of different reasons. Most miscarriages that happen in the first 12 or 13 or 14 weeks happen because something has gone wrong with very early development of the baby and it can't continue to survive. But those things are often because of chromosome problems. So chromosomes are the sort of building blocks that we all need in order to develop. And if we don't have the right number of chromosomes, that can cause a problem. So some people are born with a chromosome problem and they still can have a fine life. But some babies will not make it. They cannot develop, and so they die.
So also, these chromosomes, what are they? Is it like an emotional thing? Is it a hormone or what is it?
So you're probably asking the wrong person because I'm not a medical person. But everybody has a number of chromosomes in their body, and they are in twos. They come in pairs. Okay? So if one of them is faulty, either from the man or from the woman, that can cause a problem for the baby. It's not because of something that you do. It's something that just happens. And it's usually a one-off. So most chromosome abnormalities are random. They just happen. A very, very small number of people will have a problem that continues. Might not affect them, but it might affect a baby.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But you asked about alcohol and other things. It's important to know that in general, it's a good idea to have no or very little alcohol during pregnancy. It's also a good idea not to smoke. But if you do drink and if you do smoke, that doesn't mean you're going to miscarry. And if you miscarry, it isn't necessarily because you drank or smoked. There can be other reasons. So, for example, if the mother has some health problems, or if there is something the matter with the way that the baby is developing, maybe it has a heart problem, or maybe there's a problem with its spine, with its back. There are all sorts of things that can cause a miscarriage to happen.
Wow. So with things like alcohol and drugs, it's still possible for the baby to be born perfectly healthy And with miscarriages, obviously, it's not related to alcohol or drugs. It could happen to anybody who maybe hasn't never, drunk or done alcohols. Is there any kind of link to why miscarriages happen, things like abuse or anything like that?
Okay, so let's go back to alcohol and drugs and smoking, because it's a good idea not to do any of those things when you're pregnant. And it depends on the drugs. If you drink a lot, if you smoke a lot, it's not great for the baby, even if you don't have a miscarriage. So you can try and take care of yourself by eating healthily and living healthily. But even if you do everything according to the advice, you can still have a miscarriage, which seems very unfair.
Yeah, so why is that? That's what I think people must feel frustrated, or they must feel kind of guilty, like if they've lived a fit and healthy life.
Yes, you're right. You're right. It can feel very unfair. And sometimes people say, I've done everything I should. I stopped drinking coffee and I'm not drinking and I'm not smoking and I'm not doing drugs. And yet I've had a miscarriage, and I know somebody who smokes all the time and is always in the pub, and she's got 4 children. That's not fair. And you know what?
That's absolutely
It isn't fair, but it's also, life isn't always fair. It's a matter of chance. And you talked about people feeling guilty. It's important to know that miscarriages mostly happen, not anything to do with what you did do or what you didn't do. So we tend to feel guilty when we don't know what the cause was. Most people don't have any reason to feel guilty.
Oh my goodness, how amazing. I'm sure that lots and lots of people, they're perfectly healthy and they don't have things, but they kind of, like you say, it could be that they're trying really, really hard to be healthy. And if they had a miscarriage, do you think it's likely that they might be able to get pregnant before? Or, how do you support them through that pain if it's their first time or if they've been through miscarriages before?
Okay. I think it's first of all, it's very hard for people. For most people, not everybody is the same. Of course, some people, if they have a miscarriage, they will think, well, I know it can happen. It's one of those things. I will get through it. And they do get through it quite quickly, and they may go on and have healthy children. And some people have had a child or children before they ever have a miscarriage. So they know that they can have an okay pregnancy, and that can help. But for a lot of people, there is huge sadness and also anxiety about what's happening now and about whether they will be able to have a baby in the future. And most of them do. Most people who have a miscarriage only have one miscarriage. Some people might have 2 or more, and they might have healthy pregnancies in between. But a small number of people, 1 in 100, have recurrent miscarriage, one after another, after another. And there may be treatment, or there may not be treatment. And some of them just suddenly have a baby. So sometimes you would hear about someone who's had 7 or 8 miscarriages and then goes on to have a healthy pregnancy, and they haven't done anything different. It's just chance.
Wow. So, as you mentioned, that they might have treatment, is that to kind of prevent miscarriages happening again? But you said like it's not obviously always possible for everybody. But what sort of treatment do you get with if you're continually having miscarriages? Have you ever thought about that?
It depends on, the most important thing it depends on is whether there is an obvious reason. So most people, if they have a lot of miscarriages, a lot of them won't find out that there's anything obvious wrong. So you can't give a treatment if you don't know what you're treating. There are some things that you can't treat. So if you have a chromosome problem, the man or the woman, you can't change that because that's who they are. So the only solution for them would be to have IVF, fertility treatment, because then you can check to see if the egg is okay. And even then they might still have a miscarriage, but that's one possibility. There are a few, very, very few conditions that you can offer treatment. And sometimes when people have no answers and no obvious treatment, they will look for anything that anybody suggests. That can be a problem because they listen to their aunties who tell them what they think. You should stop eating this, you should start doing that. Or they look on the internet and they find this doctor or that doctor. Maybe they are a doctor, maybe they're not. They might offer treatments that could cost a lot of money and may not help. It's very hard when you're feeling sad and lost and vulnerable to know how to get through. And I hope that we at the Miscarriage Association can help. We can't solve things. We can't make people suddenly feel absolutely fine. But we listen and we talk with people, and I hope that helps.
Oh, brilliant. So, obviously, what's really, really important as well is the person's mental health after they've gone through something like a miscarriage. And like you say, if the doctor has no explanation, or maybe they don't have a reason, do you feel that's, it's obviously a struggle for them and it's going to affect their mental health because they've kind of got hope for the future. They've obviously kind of planned that they're going to have a baby, and it can be a massive impact to then lose the baby, especially without a reason.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very hard. I think a lot of people say it's very hard anyway. The whole emotional experience and the whole physical experience can affect you in lots of ways. People don't know what to expect, and there may be a lot of pain, and there may be a lot of bleeding, and it can be much harder than what we sometimes see on television. And the feelings can last for a long time. And you're right, for some people, those feelings of grief and loss and emptiness, there's also a feeling of shock and fear about the future. And for some people, that can lead to real depression, clinical depression, and high levels of anxiety. And if they try again and they become pregnant again, most people who are pregnant after a miscarriage or an ectopic or molar pregnancy, most people have high levels of anxiety. And that's something that we also try and offer support to help people through and to cope with their anxiety. Some people will need proper counselling and therapy. For others, it just really helps to talk with people who understand. And sometimes Sometimes the best way is to talk with other people who've been through something similar. Those are the people who don't say the wrong thing. So the wrong thing.
Definitely, absolutely agree. I mean, maybe some people wouldn't be aware that, what they're saying can affect people in a certain way or maybe hurt their feelings. But at the same time, the person who's been through that experience might still feel that person hasn't understood them, and, they're obviously trying to make them feel better, but it just makes you feel like you don't understand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's exactly like that. Because when you see somebody who's sad, we kind of have this feeling that we must make them feel better now. So instead of giving somebody a hug or saying, I'm so sorry for what's happened, and just asking, how are you doing? And listening, if you just keep saying, I'm sure it'll be fine next time, or don't worry, it wasn't really a baby yet, was it? Or you're young, you can always try again. Or you have a child already. Or anything that begins with the words at least. Because if somebody said, my mother died, you would never say, never mind, at least you have your father.
Absolutely, of course, absolutely. So when people are kind of, saying, oh, don't worry about it, you'll be fine, that person that's experienced it, do you feel that a lot of the time they feel like they just have to accept those responses, or are people kind of challenging those responses, or, obviously their emotional situations are really difficult, but obviously people have kind of said to them, oh, don't worry about it, you'll be fine. But, people do need to be careful about what they're saying because they might not have experienced the same thing before.
It's
So, what's the best advice you can give? If it was like my friend or somebody close to me, what would you recommend if I've had no experience myself? What could I say to that person? Because I'd be really worried about what to say and whether I was saying the right thing. I don't want to make them upset. I then have my own feelings of guilt. So what do you think would happen? How can I support them in the best way?
That's such a great question. I think if you say something like, I'm really sorry about what's happened, and I don't know what to say. Or, I'm really sorry. Do you want to talk about it a bit? I'm really willing to listen, and I'll try very hard not to say the wrong thing. We also have a leaflet, which is called Supporting Someone You Know. Because all the people that want to support, they don't want to say the wrong thing. They mean well, but sometimes they get it wrong.
Obviously, as a deaf person, and obviously you as a hearing person, I'm just trying to imagine, if a deaf person's gone through a miscarriage and they need support, they need help, and they kind of go to the doctors or the hospitals. But if there wasn't an interpreter or something like that, the barriers that they must face, it's almost kind of, an additional barrier to deaf people. Obviously, I've not gone through that myself, but I can imagine that feeling of anxiety and feeling like you don't know how to let people know about the fact you've been through a miscarriage. I can see how hard it is for deaf people, just because of the accessibility. It's a really tough situation in an already difficult situation.
Yes, and I think that's really, really important, because for a lot of people who go through miscarriage, they are in a state of shock, they're very upset, and even if they are hearing people and they speak good English and they understand what's being said, they will have forgotten it within 5 minutes, because they're too upset. And then if you've got another barrier, because you're deaf, for example, or people who don't speak English, or people who just have a hard time understanding anyway, maybe they have a learning problem or a reading problem, it's a double blow, it's a double barrier. And I think, one of the reasons that I'm here having this conversation with you is that we know how rubbish we are by not having all of our information signed and interpreted. And we want to make that better. And that's why we need your help.
Brilliant. So also, I'm really hoping this topic's going to get out there for deaf men as well, because there are a lot of men who don't understand what their partners are going through. Maybe their partners are kind of saying, don't worry, we'll go through it again, we'll try again. So what could you recommend, to a partner of somebody who's gone through miscarriage themselves? How could they support their partner? Or does the Miscarriage Association kind of support just the women? Or, because obviously the relationship might be affected, or it might kind of worsen abuse or things like this if people are kind of relying on alcohol or drugs to get through. But how do you think is the best way to get men to understand what the woman's experiencing as well?
Okay. So first of all, I don't always think that it's for us to tell men to be thinking about understanding the woman. She's been through the physical experience, but it was his baby too. And he might also be grieving. And he might also be very frightened for her. Think about the ectopic pregnancy, seeing somebody you love in pain and rushed to an operating theatre. Think about his feelings. Maybe it's something he did. Maybe he feels guilty about his drinking or smoking. Maybe he feels guilty because he didn't really want this pregnancy. Maybe he's just feeling such grief and loss, and she is feeling, okay, let's just try again. And he's not ready. So we need to think about both partners, and of course, women partners too. And to answer your other question, we're there for whoever needs us. So for men or women or female partners or people who are non-binary, trans people, whoever, it's really important that everyone's feelings and needs are taken into account. And you're right about relationship problems. If you've got two people in a relationship and they have a miscarriage, one of them might feel like this and the other one might feel like that. It might be quite different. And that can be difficult, especially if the relationship is already in trouble. If they're not communicating well, if they already have difficulties in expressing their feelings. So it can be important to get help.
Oh, amazing. I think we've got a question. I'm just going to have a quick look. Is that right? Just check if anyone's replied online. Oh, okay. Yeah, we have got a lot of questions. It looks great. Oh, I'm just trying to choose the right one. There's so many. Okay, so we've got this one. Somebody's asked this question on social media. What age do you think it's appropriate for young people to learn about miscarriages? And do you think it would be I think it would be a good idea to have like a deaf-led talk about miscarriage as well.
Yeah. I think that, we teach children at some stage in school or in life about sex, about relationships. We tell them a lot about how not to get pregnant. We don't always tell them about when pregnancy goes wrong or when you can't get pregnant. I think all of that should be part of education. But it would also help if there was just more general talk about miscarriage. We don't talk about it very much. People feel it's embarrassing, especially because it's to do with vaginas and bleeding. Can you say that?
Yeah, absolutely, of course. So obviously I remember I went through school, and like you say, you kind of you learn how to put condoms on and how to prevent sex and things like that. But like you say, we don't talk about miscarriage, and that's why this is so important for women and men who are experiencing miscarriages. But obviously in the past that was never a thing. But do you think going forward it's important to?
Yeah, I do. I know that I have spoken to older people, even older than me. And I remember being at a party with people in their 80s who asked me what I do, what's my job. And I tell them I work for the Miscarriage Association. And their eyes fill with tears. And they start talking about a miscarriage they had 30, 40 years ago. It stays with them and they've never talked about it. We shouldn't have that.
Wow. I mean, why do you feel that person had to hold it in? Do you think it was the lack of education previously?
No.
Was it their age? Or?
I think it's because that was the culture. The culture is you don't talk about these things. It's a taboo. It's not right. You should keep it private. Don't tell anybody. Don't think about it. Just move on. I think we're getting better, and we must keep on trying to get it better and make it okay to talk about these topics just like we're doing right now.
Oh, amazing. So also, I think maybe for younger people, I don't know obviously whether they're kind of aware of miscarriages or abortions even, because that's another topic. But obviously if a young person was to find out that they were pregnant and they thought, oh gosh, I might want to abort it, but then it was miscarriage, they might sort of feel, oh, actually I'm kind of lucky that I've kind of not had to go through that and had to keep it quiet without, extended family kind of finding out about it and things like that.
Yes. So many people who have a miscarriage are very, very sad because this is the baby they wanted. But there are people who are relieved that they've had a miscarriage, especially if they were thinking of having an abortion. So whatever you feel is whatever you feel, and that's okay. When it gets complicated sometimes, particularly for younger people, but maybe for people in their 30s too, is when you don't want a pregnancy and then you get pregnant and you don't want to keep the pregnancy and you decide to have an abortion and then you have a miscarriage and then all of a sudden you start feeling differently. Some people will just be relieved, but some people will then begin to question. And if later in life they do want a pregnancy and they have a miscarriage, some of them will think it's my fault for having an abortion. It isn't.
Wow. Well, I'm just going to have a quick look at some more questions. It's fascinating. Did you always want to kind of become the director of Miscarriage Association?
No. I used to be a social worker, and then I worked for a long time in England and in Israel with people who didn't want to be pregnant. So I worked with people talking about contraception and also abortion. I don't have any values as to what's good and what's bad and what's okay and what isn't okay. When I saw the job advertised for the director of the Miscarriage Association, I thought I'd like to do that because it's an issue for women and for men too, but particularly for women about what they see as important in their life. And for some people, it's their career and it's their education. And for some people, it's, I want a family, I want babies. Everyone is different. Everyone has a right to their feelings and their wants. If we can help people through, that's always good.
Oh, lovely. And so when you joined the Miscarriage Association, does it kind of affect you emotionally, or do you have kind of like emotional needs yourself when you joined compared to before when you were working social work? Or?
I think you can always empathize and sometimes feel very, very sad when you hear somebody's sad story. If you can't be like that, then you might not be in the right job. At least you have to understand how they're feeling. It doesn't usually make me very, very upset or very sad, but sometimes there's a story that might really hit me. That can happen. But I'm not alone in this organization. We have a helpline. There are other people, and there are volunteers who have been through miscarriage themselves, and they can also help. So please don't think that I'm the only person there.
So, obviously, is there any way to kind of tell if somebody is likely to have a miscarriage, any kind of symptoms that they might exhibit to indicate that somebody's going through a miscarriage? Is there kind of emotional signals or physical signals? Is there any way to know?
Usually the first that people know is if they start having some spotting or little bits of blood from the vagina, or it might be a lot, or there might be pain. For some people, they say, all of a sudden their pregnancy symptoms stop. They were feeling sick, now they're not feeling sick. For some people, it might just be pain with no bleeding. But you can't really tell a long time in advance.
Oh, wow. And so after someone has been through a miscarriage, is it important for them to continually have medical checkups, or?
Not necessarily. I mean, they may go to the hospital at some point, and they might have an ultrasound scan, a scan to see what's happening inside at the time. And then they sometimes have to, if the baby has died, but they haven't had the physical miscarriage yet, they may have to decide whether they just wait until it happens, or whether they take some medicine, or whether they have an operation to remove what is left of their baby or their pregnancy. Once that has all happened, most of them don't need any medical care or follow-up.
Okay. So if it were my mum or my sister, if they were kind of had miscarriages maybe regularly, am I more likely to experience a miscarriage? Is it that kind of genetic link? Should I be concerned about myself, for example?
If it was somebody in your family, it may be just coincidence. It just happens because we know how common miscarriage is. But it also might be that you share a health problem which increases your risk of miscarriage. So if you're worried because your mum has had several miscarriages, then maybe see if you can talk to your doctor about that. But the truth is that even if you have a higher risk, you still have a really good chance of having a healthy pregnancy. So nobody can tell you for sure. And if somebody says to you, well, you do have a bit of a higher risk, it sort of doesn't help, because it might just make you more anxious and there's nothing you can do about it.
Okay. So once the miscarriage has happened, like you said, once it's actually physically gone, is there a time limit before you can get pregnant again or try?
Most doctors suggest that you wait until you've had one period, or at least until you've finished bleeding before you try for another pregnancy, because it makes it easier. If you get pregnant quickly, it makes it easier to figure out how far along this new pregnancy is. Some people want to start trying straight away. Some people want to wait for months. Most of the time, as long as you're feeling well enough and emotionally ready, and you're no longer bleeding after the miscarriage, you try whenever you feel the time is right. It's not going to make a difference to your risk of miscarrying again.
Okay. So you mentioned about your helpline earlier. Is that accessible in BSL? Or?
Not yet. I feel bad about that, but we're working on it with our friends at CDA. We hope to get more available on BSL, and maybe with some visual links or video links. But people can also use live chat or email to contact us, or direct message on social media, and we will always try to help.
So what if, for example, you mentioned about your helpline, it's not yet in BSL, but obviously I know a lot of deaf people would kind of rather call through an interpreter. Maybe their English is not that great. Would your advisors kind of understand? Do you think your aim is to kind of be fully accessible for BSL in the future?
Yeah. The other week, somebody got in touch with me about a woman. He was a community worker and she was from Eritrea. She didn't speak English. We arranged a Zoom call. So she spoke to him and he spoke to me. So that's interpreting. You can do the same with BSL. But also sometimes we have people who get in touch and they don't speak good English, and we do our very, very best to be slow and steady and to try to understand. Everybody matters.
Brilliant. So is there the support that people get from miscarriages, is there kind of NHS support, or is it government support, or is it just the Miscarriage Association? Because I know a lot of people maybe complain about the sort of support they might get from the government or the NHS. So do you think there's the right amount of support out there from both organisations?
There is never enough. And I think we work with with the health service, with nurses and doctors and midwives, to support them in the care that they give and to help them to do as well as they can, and to think about the words they use and the look on their faces and the kindness that you always need, and to think about what they're saying. And we provide them with all of our leaflets free so that they can give them to people. And yeah, there is always a need for more.
So, what do you think we can do in raising awareness about miscarriages for the future?
We just have to talk about it. We just have to talk about it and have meetings like these for deaf people, for hearing people, for blind people, for all sorts of people, so that it becomes okay to talk about it. And then it's okay, people feel better about asking questions. And we also have to educate our young people. And sometimes we have to educate our old people too.
Brilliant, it's so true. So I just want to thank you so much for coming today, and hopefully people are a lot more aware about miscarriages. And obviously it's so important. I'm still learning myself a lot of these sorts of things. So it's amazing for you to come in, and hopefully it's going to start people being able to reach out. So have you got any kind of questions for me or for the deaf community, or any last comments?
First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me and for giving us at the Miscarriage Association the opportunity to reach out to deaf people and to learn from you about what's needed to make our services more accessible. I think that's the most important thing. We're going to work on it. We couldn't have done it without you. So if I'm going to get this right, let's try. Thank you. No, thank you.
Yeah, amazing. Well done. Oh, thank you so much. So, thank you all for watching, and a massive thank you to Ruth for coming in and for Rachael to being here. Hopefully people online have found that really, really helpful. It's so important, and you can contact CDA for additional support, and we're here to listen to you. So thank you, and bye.